welcome Jozef from the Marine Lab down the road, good collaborator with the university, lots of interaction there. He's going to talk about deriving carbon pools in the northwestern European shelf with model-informed deep learning. Over to you, Jozef.
Thank you very much. So first let me start with an apology, which is the best possible way, because I was originally planning to talk about an overview of activities that we are working on, but then I thought it's just crazy to do that in 10 minutes, so I kind of decided to focus on this topic instead. So what this is all about, so as we're knowing, we're emitting a lot of carbon into the atmosphere, about 30% goes into the ocean, and it's quite important to understand what then happens with it, right? It transforms, it circulates in the ocean in different forms. In the organic forms, it gets to primary production, it turns into a biomass, then it might die. In an organic form, it might, as a dead metal, it might sink down into the sea bottom. It might turn in different inorganic forms. So it's very important to monitor the carbon pools in the ocean, and particularly we're focusing on the Northwest European Shelf area, which is the UK regional seas, and they're quite important from that point of view. I mean, there's a lot of carbon uptake, and then sending carbon into the deeper ocean. So it's quite important to understand what's going on, but it's not very easy because the observations are pretty sparse and few. I mean, there are emerging satellite products, but they're more global focused, coarser resolution, not very well calibrated for the Northwest European Shelf, and they're not covering everything, of course, and they're only from the ocean surface. So if we want to get a more complete understanding, it's usually what we can use is models. They provide quite comprehensive information, but the information is many times somewhat problematic because our models are known to have different biases, different types of uncertainties, different types of issues. So it's not ideal. Then maybe, possibly, the best possible product that we get that kind of gives you an overview is a multi-decadal reanalysis, where we are basically assimilating the observations into the model, constraining the model day by the observations, and it gives you some overview of these carbon pools. The issue is that due to computational cost of biogeochemistry models, the methods that we are using are reasonably simple. I mean, this carbon gets updated through model dynamics, but it takes time, it's computationally expensive, and it's limited. So the idea here is that what if we decided that we trust the model that provides a reasonably correct map between what we call observable quantities and these carbon pools. So this map is some kind of emergent property of the model that basically contains all the hydrodynamics, all the biological processes that are modeled by the model. And then we will trust this map that the model provides between observable quantities, and I will explain what it is, and carbon pools. And we can then use the model simulations to train a machine learning model to learn this map. And we could then derive from the observations these carbon pools that are modeled by the model. What are the advantages? Well, we have a lot of training data. There's no problem with the training data whatsoever. The model is specifically adapted for the Northwest European Shelf, even though it has its issues. And we can predict all sorts of variables also vertically, whereas the data will typically be from the ocean surface. Disadvantages, it's a big assumption, but everything is some kind of trade-off. So the idea is basically to build something like that. Now, what are the predictors or features or model inputs? We're using a variety of variables, but what we call the observable variables, we're using robustly observable variables from the satellite, which is sea surface temperature. We consider surface salinity as well. Then what we consider from the ocean color, chlorophyll, partitioned in the different size class chlorophyll, which is a regularly available satellite product. We use atmospheric data from the ERA 5, such as wind stress and solar radiation, because these are generally considered available. Riverine discharge data, and we also use some structural data, such as latitudes, longitudes, and that. And what we're predicting is carbon across all the main compartments in the biogeochemistry model. So that will be the dissolved organic carbon, it will be detrital carbon, zooplankton carbon, bacteria carbon. And we predicted them on the surface, but we're also predicting them vertically, the ones that are really interesting, such as dissolved organic carbon, DOC, the dissolved organic carbon, detritus, and bacteria. So now, this slide I'll go through very quickly, but you can consider the model not being really a map, because the model has many poorly constrained parameters, and these parameters, these are constants that appear in the model, they can therefore have uncertainties in their values. So you can consider that in fact this map is like an ensemble of maps depending on the parameter uncertainty. So I just did a test in 1D setup of the model where I can run large ensembles, how much usual, what we consider typical uncertainty of model parameters impacts on the uncertainty of these predicted pools. And so this is just a very quick slide just to say that I've done such exercise and introduces some uncertainty that I quantified, but it's not the main result. But then I used 5-year simulations from the free run to train this neural net model, deep neural net. And the model performs very nicely on validation data for all the variables, in terms of R-square metric. However, the key test here is after you learn this map, what you want to do is to use as inputs the observational data and predict then the corresponding carbon pools. So you want to apply to observational data, which is quite bold because this is a little bit outside of the range that the model has seen. So does the model generalize to this quite non-trivial application? And how can we test it? Well, we can test it by first predicting these outputs, but comparing it to this reanalysis product, where these pools have been modified to the model dynamics after the model has been constrained by the observations. And when we do that for the surface fields, for the surface variables, we get really very nice results in the sense that most of these surface variables, such as detritus, zooplankton, bacteria, get clearly improved as measured by the reanalysis outputs for these variables. So indeed, you're learning this map from the model free run without being constrained and applying it to observations as understood as a reanalysis, which is pretty close to that. It's just technically advantageous to use reanalysis. It indeed works, which is quite a result I was quite pleased by, because what it means is that effectively you can replace all this computationally expensive system and use just this tool to predict from the observations these carbon pools without doing all these complicated and computationally heavy things. But it doesn't work for vertically averaged variables, and there is a reason for that they really tend to have a much slower dynamics because of the deep ocean dynamics. They're much slower, and they're much more dependent on the structural variables. So they don't generalize really to this different situation. Moreover, I was running ensembles of these neural nets, deep ensembles, and so I came also with some uncertainty quantification, which is limited, I do realize, but it's a nice add-on that can be done in this system. Furthermore, and this is a more kind of problematic and speculative thing, but once you get this machine learning model, you can run what-if scenarios. You can just, of course, there's problems with that, but you can run it because it's computationally so cheap. And we know that in the future we're predicting that, for example, the phytoplankton will turn the larger species will decrease and the smaller species will increase. So I ran, for example, what-if scenario by keeping total phytoplankton biomass the same, by just replacing the larger species with smaller species and looking what it does with the other variables. And the key point is that you would expect that it will reduce the sinking of carbon, so the export of carbon, which is a bad thing because we want to dump all the carbon to the seafloor, so not to return into the atmosphere. So, and this kind of indirectly quantifies this effect. Obviously, it's very bold and it's very problematic because you're moving away from the scene data. But, okay, I've done some uncertainty quantification, but there is much more work to do here, and it shouldn't be taken too seriously at the moment. But it's a nice application that really, I want to follow in the future. Similarly, I've done another one where I'm decreasing the total phytoplankton biomass, which is again consistent with the scenarios that are predicted for this UK regional seas in the future, and looking at how it impacts all the variables. So obviously, zooplankton decreases, and some of the other decrease, which is not surprising. So conclusions, to finish. So it's quite exciting that you can train these models, learn this map, and then apply it to observations, and it seems to work in this sense in which it could be validated. And then there should be much more work done on this uncertainty assumption, and, for example, understanding what if scenarios break down. But the vision is really, what if we can just apply it and create this really long-term mapping of carbon pools from observations using these models can be done very quickly. But one idea is also to improve our forecasting systems. This can be actually combined with the data assimilation system on a rolling basis and make our forecast much better. I mean, it's a bit more complicated there, so I'm not going into details, but instead of updating only the observed variables, we can use these tools to update a much larger part of the biogeochemistry model. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Jozef. We have time for a couple of questions, if anybody has one they would like to ask. And while the questions are happening, could the next speaker come on down and get their slides ready, please?
I'm just interested in what kind of neural network you're running, or what you're experimenting with.
Simple feed-forward. It's very simple. Well, the idea is to really use because of also the gaps in the observational data, I want to do it a local pixel. So it's yeah, in terms of the model, it's fairly simple.
Okay. I have a more general question. Right? So LSM is what you call a traditional ocean model, has lots of different boxes, lots of equations, and it's been trained and developed, well, not even trained, created and parameterized with observations from things in labs, right? Beakers and white coats and pipettes and all that sort of stuff. And then along comes Earth observation data, provides a different way of observing similar variables. How has Earth observation, how does it interact with models like ERSAM? How can you use Earth observation data for models that are like us?
Yeah, so the basic exercise is always to parameterize them all because of a huge uncertainty in the time. There's more than 400 parameters in there. So. Now, the traditional ones is using the lab experiments and a lot of lab work. But of course, once this has been recalibrated, it's been using Earth observations from satellites. Now, typically, however, this is done at specific 1D locations, which is using also in situ data, but also satellite data. So it's quite limited. And then, of course, the interaction with the Earth observations comes really in the reanalysis and in the forecast, where you assimilate them. So you constrain it, but you don't really change the model. What we want to move on is also to change the model in the sense of update the parameters in the data assimilation cycle, but the real main update with the oncoming resolution is to assimilation.
Thank you. Okay, in that case, let's thank Jozef once more.